evening and welcome to the Coon Rapids City Council meeting for Tuesday, February 5th, 2019. If you could please rise and join us for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Griscoviac. Here. Councilmember Kicker. Here. Councilmember Demmer. Here. Councilmember Geisler. Here. Councilmember Johnson. Here. Councilmember Wells. Here. Mayor Cook.
Here. Thank you. First item on our agenda then is to adopt this evening's agenda.
Your Honor.
Councilmember Demmer.
Move to adopt the agenda.
Second.
Motion by Demmer, second by Geisler to adopt the agenda. Any changes, corrections, or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the agenda is adopted. We are up to approving the minutes from the January 15th, 2015, or 2019 meeting.
Your Honor, move the minutes.
Second.
Motion by Wells, second by Demmer to approve the minutes of January 15th, 2019. Any discussion or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And those are approved. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 items on our consent agenda this evening. And the first is to approve a site lease with New Singular Wireless PCS and AT&T. So New Singular Wireless has requested the city to place telecommunication antennas on the city's water tower located at 11574 Crooked Lake Boulevard. City staff and AT&T have negotiated the attached lease to permit AT&T to place its facilities at that location. The highlights of the lease included an initial 5-year term with 3 additional 5-year options. AT&T shall pay an initial rent of $32,000 annually with a 4% increase each year thereafter. Tenants' use of the facility shall be subordinate to the city's use of the facility as well as other public safety and government agencies. When the lease has ended or is terminated by either party, AT&T shall be responsible to remove its equipment, repair, and restore the site. And so our first item will be to approve the site lease agreement with New Singular Wireless PCS for a telecommunication facility at the Crooked Lake Water Tower and authorize the mayor and city manager to execute the agreement and any other necessary documents. Item 3 this evening is to approve a master consulting agreement with Braun Intertech Corporation. They will be added to our list of firms that we work with. We'll be adding that to, looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 other companies. So we'll be adding, this action will add Braun Intertech Corporation to the city's consultant pool and authorize appropriate staff to execute such agreement. Item 4 is to approve, we'll be approving final payment to North Valley in the amount of $16,519.52 for project 17-4 street reconstruction. Item 5 will be to approve of change order and final payment to Northwest Asphalt Incorporated in the amount of $141,486.61 for project 18-2, 2018 street reconstruction. Item 6 will be to approve the statewide health improvement partnership letter of agreement with Anoka County for the period of November 1st, 2018 through October 31st, 2019, and adopt resolution number 19-29, accepting SHIP grant funds for city senior mobility. Item 7 will be to approve the service agreement with Alexandra House. Alexandra House is a nonprofit corporation that is Anoka County's only women's shelter. It provides a 24-hour shelter, support services, advocacy, educational opportunities to residents in the city and county and Anoka County. Alexandra House also works with the police department and the city attorney's office with domestic violence cases. Alexandra House has made a request for financial assistance for the services it provides to the city, and the council did appropriate $12,500 to the Alexander House in the 2019 budget for these services. This service agreement reduces the parties' wishes to writing, and the agreement is for 1 year and can be terminated by either party with 30 days' notice. And then I noticed they added the Johnson clause this time.
I saw
Should-
that too.
Should this contract be terminated early, the funds paid shall be returned by Alexander House in proportion to the number of months the contract was not fulfilled. So we will be approving the city to enter into a service agreement with Alexander House to provide shelter, support services, and advocacy to affected city residents. Item 8, we will be adopting Resolution 19-30, adopting the multi-jurisdictional Anoka County All-Hazard Mitigation Plan. And the last item on our consent agenda is to adopt Resolution 19-30, amending fees and charges for use of the city center facilities.
Your Honor,
Councilmember Demmer.
move to adopt the consent agenda.
Second?
Motion by Demmer, second by Kicker to adopt the consent agenda. Any questions or discussion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Geisler?
I think the last one for, well, it says in the recommendation 19-30, the resolution is 19-32.
Ah, very good. Any other discussion or corrections?
Just a quick question.
Councilmember Johnson?
Just for staff, the singular wireless lease for, which is consent agenda item number 2, is that kind of the going rate? Is that consistent with other leases we have for wireless providers on the towers?
It is, it's about where most of our leases are at, and that's why we agreed upon that number.
And how does that fit in with the market? Pretty competitive?
I think
citywide?
we're actually, if we're certainly at market, if not even a little above.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Mr. Hammer, that particular water tower, a year or two ago, we had one of the neighbors complaining about a noise coming from it. It was a buzz, a hum, it was something. And I'm just curious, was that a water tower thing, or was that a cell, one of the antenna things?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it was a generator for one of the small cell users that they hadn't been maintaining on a regular basis, so that's since been addressed.
And do we have do we have a way to make them do that, or did they just do that because it was no longer even functioning properly?
Well, they're supposed to be taking care of that on regular maintenance, but sometimes that doesn't always turn out that way. So when we became aware of it, we let them know, they came out, they serviced it, it was taken care of on the spot.
Okay, excellent. Because I remember the conversation was something like it was less than 50 decibels or something, so we didn't feel like we had anything in the ordinance to go after. Okay, as long as they took care of it, all right. Okay, any other discussion on the consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Griscoviac?
quite a bit on this agenda, so I actually have a couple of questions. First one was going to be on number 3 here, approving the master consulting agreement. First question was, once a new company is added to that master consulting agreement, does that eliminate competitive bidding? Because some of those companies consult in both, multiple areas.
No, Councilmember Griscoviac, when a specific project comes up, we look at those that are within that pool, and as long as it stays under the statutory requirements, then we kind of go for a competitive process within the pool.
Perfect, that's what I was looking for. And then how often is that updated? I see it was originally introduced in 2013. I think we did this a couple of years ago, we added something, so is it as needed, or is there a set time?
As different consultants come on board. Braun has been working with us on a lot of our recon projects, and we keep doing annual proposals and annual contracts and how we work that. And so we said, why don't we just look to get you into this pool? So if you come up with some recommendations for us, or other companies come and send us some propaganda, and we feel that they would fit nicely within that, we kind of review from time to time who's in there. Some people go, some people stay, but we do amend that as needed.
Perfect. The next question I had on is on number 8 here, adopting resolution 1930, multi-jurisdictional Anoka County all-hazard mitigation plan. First, I was wondering, this is maybe a question for the county, but where do we find the Anoka County all-hazard mitigation plan? And then the question for staff would be, who from the city actually participates in the county planning? Is it the police and fire chiefs? Is it the city manager? Is it our attorney?
Mayor and Council, the plan can actually be found on the Anoka County website.
Okay.
And then I do most of the work with it. This is a 5-year update, we're always doing it. So the chief is the director of emergency management, I'm a deputy director. Chief Piper is also a deputy director, so we all work together to work on this.
Okay. Thank you. That's,
Captain Rickworth does most of the work.
does the heavy lifting on that. Huh? That was clear. Okay.
Any other discussion? All right, so we had just the one change in the ordinance, that number. Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, and the consent agenda is adopted. We are up to holding a public hearing. Item 10 on this evening's agenda, hold a public hearing and ordinance introduction for the sale of a residential lot 100XX Cottonwood. Mr. Brown, did you want to just give us that little quick history, or do you want me to read your discussion here?
I can, Your Honor, members of the council. This is a lot. You may remember last spring, the city had this land platted. It's some excess land that had been part of a road improvement project back in the 1980s near the intersection of 101st Avenue and Cottonwood Street. We really determined there's a lot more land there than we would ever need. So we platted the property into 2 lots. One lot, this one, is large enough to be a buildable lot. The other was a sliver of land that we conveyed to a neighbor recently. That was a very small piece of land. So in this case, we did advertise this lot on the city's website. We received an offer for $55,000. Because the city owns the land, any sale has to take place after a public hearing and also by ordinance. So you'll be asked to introduce that ordinance tonight, and we'll come back for adoption in 2 weeks. Also provide a purchase agreement at that time, but Tolberg Homes is the buyer. They have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that they propose at that location. The proposed sale price is $55,000, which we feel reflects market value.
Very good. Anybody have any questions? All right, well, no further questions then, or if there aren't any questions, we will open the public hearing for the sale of the residential lot 100XX Cottonwood Street. If anybody is here to address council, public hearing for the sale of a residential lot 100XX Cottonwood Street. Seeing nobody here to address council for that public hearing, we will close the public hearing, and we will consider this introduced. We're introducing the ordinance authorizing conveyance of the property at 100XX Cottonwood Street to Tolberg Homes LLC for $55,000. Councilmember Demmer?
So this is an introduction, so just a request for when we go to approve it, if it is appropriate to have something that showing about what the final house might look like, and so we can understand how that house fits into the character of the neighborhood.
Yes, I will include a house plan in that, staff report.
All right, excellent. Item 11 is to consider resolution number 19-7 sub 9, awarding a contract for the 2019 well rehabilitation program. Mr. Himmer, any highlights there you want to hit on?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is our annual program. We've got, we're kind of on that regular schedule now, so we have 3 wells and 2 booster pumps we're proposing. We did some prep work with last year's project, and so this is just a continuation of our regular program. And with that, I'll stand for any questions you may have.
All right. All right, anybody have any questions, or does anybody want to make that motion?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember
I'll
Geisler?
make a motion to adopt resolution 19-7 sub 9, awarding a contract to Minnesota Mechanical Solutions in the amount of $406,756 for the 2019 well rehabilitation program.
I'll second that.
Motion by Geisler, second by Johnson. Discussion?
Mayor?
Councilmember Kraskowiak?
I think it's pretty well documented in the packet here, but the bid for $406K, the winning bid, that would include everything, if everything goes bad, right? And in our historical, that's usually not the case, right? I mean,
That's correct. We typically come in considerably under budget, Councilmember Skoviak.
right.
All right, any other discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? And that motion is adopted. Item 12, where did it go? There it is. Consider adoption of ordinance 2216, approving a zone change 11790 Exeon Street SPL Holdings. This is the lot that is just north of Northdale and just west of Exeon, right behind those the St. Creek Loft townhomes. I think Mr. Harlicker did a program 2 weeks, or the last council meeting on this. Does anybody need any further information on this?
I do have one question.
Councilmember Demmer?
So, rezoning to moderate density, so we'd expect if a builder came in and put in some moderate density, they would also put in private streets, or would you expect the city would have to put in streets? Because I'm assuming if there's more than one building put on that site, we're gonna need some
Yeah,
some
Mayor
roads.
and Councilmember Demmer. The applicant is also the developer, and once this this request gets approved, they're planning on coming in with a townhouse development for the property. We haven't seen an application yet.
And so that would mean it would be private roads.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions on that?
Well,
Councilmember Skoviak?
Maybe it's premature, but would the private road be coming off of Xeon, or would it be coming off? It would have to, right?
The road will be coming off of Exeon.
Xeon. Okay, thank you.
All right, anybody want to tackle this one?
Your Honor.
Thank you, Councilmember Demmer.
In planning case 18-23, move that the city council approve the attached ordinance 2216, approving the proposed zoning change based on the findings. Do I have to read the findings? Based on those findings, all four of them.
Four stated findings.
Yep.
Second?
Motion by Demmer, second by Kicker. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? And that motion carries. Item 13, since there's a potential conflict of interest, I will recuse myself and turn this over to Councilmember Wells.
Item 13 is Planning Commission 18-24 to consider adoption of ordinance 2217 to allow single-family homes in Port Evergreen. Similarly, Mr. Harlicker made a presentation last council meeting. Staff need any additional information? Any questions of staff? Or council? Ms. Lensmeyer has a question.
Acting Mayor, members of the council, if we could ask you to consider approval of a summary ordinance that is attached. The recommendation does not ask for it. We'd request that you would approve a summary publication if you decide to go forward with the ordinance.
Is Lensmeyer, the summary ordinance has Jerry Cook Mayor on it? Should it not?
I'll defer to legal. How do you feel?
I think we should probably take it off since he's not participating, and even though,
Okay.
by that, if it gets signed, obviously the mayor could sign off on it, but I think to continue on with keeping the conflict as out of the way, we'll just have it changed to the acting.
Actually, the main ordinance does as well, now that I look, so, okay,
We'll make that change before publication.
thank you.
So I'll make a motion in planning case 18-24 that we approve the attached ordinance 2217 to allow single-family homes as permitted use in Port Evergreen, together with the summary ordinance attached with the signature blocks for the acting mayor to be, well, the signature blocks that are there that reflect the mayor now to be corrected to reflect the acting mayor.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Acting Mayor? I just, I think that the Planning Commission went over this pretty well. The previous meeting went over this pretty well. I think it's a pretty straightforward case of why we'd want to have single-family homes permitted in this port for reasons that they could just be updated and kept up. So I'll support this ordinance.
I think just to dovetail on that, one of the things, just for the benefit of people watching right now, that's been difficult in this port is that there are people with houses that can't improve them under the existing design specs and requirements in the port, and this would allow them the ability to do that and to build out some of the undeveloped property as well. So,
I would agree, it makes a lot of sense. All in favor?
aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Welcome back, Mayor.
Peaceful transition of power.
Yes.
Peaceful transition of power like that. So we covered this last time, that was a good thing to add, and that is the fact that it's a real estate client of mine that owns one of those properties, or that owns that lot down there that's impacted, so. All right, we are on item 14. Consider appeal of planning commission decision, planning case 18-21, site plan 6-unit townhouse, Grandmore Homes. Mr. Harlicker.
Yeah, Mayor and council members, council is being asked to consider an appeal of a planning commission decision to approve the 6-unit townhouse project. That was approved by the planning commission on December 20th. Following that meeting, 4 neighbors submitted an appeal to that approval. The property is 8.95 acres and is currently a single-family residence. The site is this property here.
0.89 something acres, right?
109th Hoover School, Coon Rapids Boulevard down here. This is the site plan that the Planning Commission approved. You can see it's 6 units with the fronts facing the west, private drive coming in with direct access then to each of the units, some parking spaces here. This is approximately 53 feet from the north property line and about 80 feet from the west property line. This was a landscaping plan that was approved. With these are mostly ornamental trees, lilac trees, and crabs along here with some oversized bushes. Along the north property line here, it's really a mix. You've got a couple overstory trees, 3 evergreen trees, and some dogwood bushes that get pretty thick and fairly tall. These evergreen trees are placed at the end of the drive aisle here to help screen the cars coming in and out from the neighbors to the back. A condition of the approval was that there be a privacy fence installed along this north property line. Maximum height allowed by code is 7 feet. And then along this side property line here where the school is, again, they've got some large, I believe they're choke cherry bushes planted along here to provide some screening. Then overstory trees and some more shrubs across the front with overstory trees, some shrubs, and ornamental grasses on the front of the units. This is what the buildings will look like. These are the line drawings. This is the front of the buildings. The windows here are in the master bedroom with windows on 2 sides, and these would be transom windows up above. Again, you've got a mix of stone, and then you've got coverings or porticos over the doors, and these dormers across the front here, kind of break up the roof line. This is the rear elevation. They've got some eyebrow dormers up above each unit to break up the roof line. Then they've got some metal roofs over the patio doors, which kind of corresponds with the same thing that they have over each of the overhead doors across the front, the garage doors. This is the north and south elevation. These windows correspond with living room here, bedroom, bathroom, and another bedroom on the second story. And this is where the front door is. These are the overhangs over the front with wooden posts supporting them. And then this is the overhang over each of the garage doors.
Of course, that view will only be on the two end units, right?
Pardon?
That view would only be on the two end units.
Correct.
Because it's a 6-unit continuous building.
Yep.
Okay.
Here's a colored rendition of it. Again, you see the mix of colors with kind of a grayish blue, then gray, and then the stone base with the wood posts, the white doors. This is what it would look from the back. They omitted the eyebrows on the roof lines across the back. Those will be installed. That was also a condition of the Planning Commission approval. And then they've got the privacy fences between each of the patios.
Councilmember Kraskowiak?
Back to that rendition, you said that, were they gonna be dormers on this view?
Correct. This will correspond with the
It's kind of a little,
with the line drawings. It's not showing up.
no.
But on the rear elevations, there were those kind of eyebrow dormers above the windows here for each unit, to kind of break up
Right,
the roof line.
okay.
Late this afternoon, I did get an email from the neighbors. They were unavailable to attend tonight's meeting. But they outlined 10 questions or issues that they'd like answers to, and I'll try to address those as best I can. The first one is that they asked if the proposed building at 23 feet 6 inches is correct, and that is. That's measured halfway up the peak, as that's how we measure the height of the buildings. They also asked, there was some confusion about whether this property would be rezoned or not, and if their property would be rezoned as part of this application. No, it will not. This application is strictly for the townhouse development on this parcel. There was some discussion at the meeting about privacy wall. The Planning Commission, as part of their approval, conditioned privacy fence along that north property line, the rear property line. The maximum height allowed is 7 feet. Anything higher than that would require a variance. They also had some questions about, the fifth one was glare from the lights. There was illumination plans submitted as part of the application. The level of light at the north property line is 0.1 foot candles, and on the west property line it's 0. There's 3 lights proposed in the site plan, here, and here, and they're directed away from the neighbor's property and towards the driveway and the front of the townhomes. The sixth item was it's about keeping at the back corner back in here. There's some lilac bushes. There was some discussion at the meeting about keeping those. The plan does not include keeping any of the bushes along the perimeter of the property. They asked about the impact of the building on casting shadows. Staff report said it should not. They wanted some clarification, and based on the height of the structure, it's 80-some feet to this property line and 53 feet to the north. there really shouldn't be any shading impact on those adjacent neighbor properties. The structure itself is a little over 23 feet high, so shading will not be an issue on the adjacent properties. The eighth item is the windows. They don't want windows facing their property. And again, as on the elevations, these are really typical of what you'd see on a two-story house. You've got a lower level living room window, 2 bedroom windows, and a window in a bathroom. Those are the only windows on the north elevation that's facing the neighbor's property.
Mr. Harlicker?
Yes.
Councilmember Griscoviac?
I was just gonna point out that he was describing some of those drawings, but we couldn't see what he was describing. So
Oh.
I think I followed along pretty well, but for the rest of us.
Well, I think he's covering you're covering the letter from the neighbors, right? The email from the
Correct,
neighbors?
yes. They submitted an email late this afternoon, and I wanted to try to respond to their
You were
their
referring,
questions.
you were referring to drawings, though. You were saying this side and that picture, but I couldn't see what you were referring to.
Okay. Does council see the elevations that's up on the screen now, the side building elevations?
No, seeing them on my iPad, but.
Okay. They also, the ninth item was question about a conditional use permit, and that's not applicable for this application. It doesn't require a conditional use permit. And the last item is glare from the headlights coming into the property. You can see from the landscape plan, there's 2 evergreen trees planted at the end, along with some shrubs. Granted, the shrubs will lose their leaves in the winter, but during the summer, they'll provide a screen. The evergreen trees will be year-round, and there will be a 7-foot-high fence across that back property line to help screen the headlights from shining onto the neighbors' rear yards. With that, I'll answer any questions. I know the applicant is in the audience tonight if you have any questions of him, or the builder is in the audience.
Councilmember Demmer?
Could you go back to the rendering of the rear elevation? So if I'm understanding right, that's the view that you'll see, I mean, with the privacy fence in, but that's the view from Hoover School, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. I'm not a building evaluator by trade, but that's a fairly uninspired view. Adding the eyebrow dormers is a pretty minimal step, but overall, this building has both the front and the back, sort of this long, continuous, single color. On the other side of that neighborhood, there's 2 triplexes where they took basically the same idea of six places and they broke it into 2 buildings, so it doesn't have that same length. And when I think about row houses, I tend to think about something this size, but broken up a little bit more by color, so it's not as monotonous. I'm curious if we are approving the color scheme or if there's room to still ask for something to make it more visually interesting, either breaking it up where, you know, each house has a slightly different color, or there's some sort of, and it's just not, if this was across the street from me, it would be tough to say to my neighbors, yep, that really makes the neighborhood look nicer when it's that monotonous.
I just want to be more blunt and candid about it. I think as I look through the floor plans, there's some nice features. I mean, there's fireplaces, you know, it's a 2-car garage situation and everything. But when I look at the exterior kind of portrayals and elevations, it reminds me of a barracks. And I don't mean that to be offensive, but mean that to inspire some possibility for some creative thinking so it's more attractive to the neighbors. There are some things in here that I look at and I become concerned that this kind of a development will not be as attractive to the community and attractive to the neighbors as we as council would like it to be. And we've been doing all these things in the city to encourage more creative design kind of attributes for single-family housing. And even though this is a multifamily unit, we hope it inspires some of that change as well. Some of the ideas from Homes for Generation and things like that. So, I don't want to stand in the way of people developing their property. I'll listen through all the process, but candidly, when I look at this, I think to myself, boy, I wish this wasn't being built in Coon Rapids. And I'm really not trying to be offensive in the idea of building a 6-unit development on this property. I'm completely fine with that and would like to see that kind of development because I think it's a good location for a multifamily kind of property, especially a multifamily property that is geared for having younger families there. You got school right there. I mean, what a convenient piece of property for a 6-unit. But I would hope that in the dialogue that the Planning Commission can have and that neighbors can have and that developers can have for their neighborhood, that there would be more creativity brought to it. And so that's my 2 cents that I wanted to add into the discussion.
Mr. Harlicker, I've got just a couple quick questions, and actually I should go to you first, Mr. Brody. So this was appealed to us. The Planning Commission has already signed off on this. They've already signed off on the site plan. They've already signed off on everything. It's an appeal from the neighbors that they think it's, that for their stated reasons why they don't feel it fits there. So how much lateral do we have here?
One of the appeals from the neighbors was assure the design of the building has eye appeal.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor Geisler?
So the rear is going to end up with some eyebrows. We could potentially look at some different from a design, because if you go to the front rendering, so in our design standards, we have requirements for stone. Can you flip to the front rendering? So you see multiple colors. You see breakups of the roof line. You see there's stone. There's that secondary color. Our design guidelines are for the front of buildings. We don't have design guidelines for the rear of the buildings. And so that is where, do I like the back of that building? No, but I don't know if I have anything that I can really push on. I think adding the eyebrow dormers, if we could go with, that same blue or the color that's on the front of the house to add some depth on the back side of that. If there's anything, because typically when we would look at a site plan, you would look at the breakup of that linear footage. And so if there was some articulation in the building that would bring something across, or if there was, a decorative siding that could maybe try and delineate the different units, something that would be a little more aesthetically pleasing to the back of the building, seeing that it is also like the front of the building when you're at the school. And that's a unique situation with this piece of property.
Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you. One of the things that makes it a little bit unusual is what we're talking about is putting this, I might get my terminology a little bit wrong here, but putting this building the long way on a lot that's narrow. And so when we speak of fronts and backs, we're in a bit of a weird situation here because the front is actually facing, as I recall, to the west.
Yeah.
The street side is actually an open window side that doesn't have multicoloring. So
Right.
if you're
Yeah.
talking about the front of the lot, it doesn't have that. And then the rear is facing in one of the more publicly viewable parts, not toward a traditional backyard in the back of the long lot, but it's facing what I would call a side yard
Yeah.
that faces out into the parking lot for the school and will be frankly highly visible to all of the neighbors that come in and out of that school. So it is a bit of an unusual situation, and I think that does get to the mayor's question of what is the latitude in those kinds of dynamics and situations that the planning commission has to require certain things. I also had forgot to mention earlier, and I can't remember if this was a discussion at the planning commission or not, I just want to get it in my own mind. Is there going to be an association that manages, for example, snow removal and landscaping and mowing on this, or is it going to be one of those developments, we have a few of them left over in Coon Rapids, where it's like multiple lots? I'm assuming this is gonna be association situation.
That's correct.
Okay.
One of the recommendations is, conditions that it was approved on is any homeowners, there must be a homeowners association and it must be approved by the city attorney,
Okay,
which is per our ordinance.
thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
So, in a typical site plan review from a planning perspective, we would work with the developer to say, I don't like this. Can we change this? What are you willing to do a give and take? How can we adjust that design? And I guess I would wonder if the developer would be willing to have some of that dialogue tonight.
Mr. Harlicker, before we start that, can I ask you about the parking? So right now, there's the three overflow parking spaces are actually parallel parking spaces that on any street in Coon Rapids would be illegal. You can't park across from a driveway, but yet that's where we're putting the extra parking spaces. You know,
at the end of the drive.
instead of at the end, like the unit down at the other end, that one that Councilmember Demmer was talking about earlier, 109th and Yukon, they've got an overflow, they've just got the three parking spaces like alongside of the building, so they're separate. And then also to that one, not only is it two, 3 units, they're staggered, so there's actually a little bit of dimension to the units. And I'm just curious if that was just something they brought forward in the design, or if that was something that Planning Commission was able at the time to say, we really encourage you to get a little dimension here. Do you know anything about that one?
Councilman, this is the layout that the developer proposed. And the parking stalls are actually indented away from the edge of the curb line, so they're not actually blocking the drive aisle, the 20-foot wide drive aisle. They're indented 8 feet to give room for parking here. And this is a private drive, and it still allows enough room for emergency access. Because of the way the narrowness of the site and the need for stormwater management around the perimeter of the site, we did look at trying to do 3 stalls at the end. It wouldn't fit because of the stormwater management issues, the open space requirement. And then this is more of a centrally located area as opposed at the far end. And that's why they were proposed where they're at.
Okay. So the reason you can't do it on our streets isn't for drive lane, it's because you don't want cars to back into those cars. And this is not as wide as our street. So it's like we're setting up a separate standard for inside of here from our normal parking on the streets.
That's correct.
Okay. Did you want to?
Yeah,
Question
so
from-
let's take a look at that rear facing, the Hoover facing elevation. How's that?
Yes,
Down
Mr.
this
Brody.
particular path, you would ask a question about sort of leeway
I
and things
had.
of
Yeah.
that nature. Obviously, the council has the ability tonight to affirm the approval, planning commission's approval. It's gonna sound a little confusing here, which would be denying the appeal. Or you could deny the planning commission approval, or sort of uphold the appeal of these neighbors, or you could modify. Now, if we approve planning commission, they made specific findings, and if you refer back to the planning commission report, it talks about all the things that they went through to say whether this plan meets it, and they said yes, yes, yes. And then I think there was some give and take at that planning commission meeting, and some things were added or along the way. So if we do want to sort of modify, or the council's interested in, denying, it's gonna take planning commission has set us down a path. Now, obviously, you're gonna have a conversation now with the developer or the builder here, It's gonna be some back and forth here, and if there's some agreement, obviously that's, if the parties, all agree on it, then we can certainly head that direction. If they're not in agreement and you still have some concerns, then we'll have to have another discussion. Does that make sense?
Councilor Demmer?
I think so. One of the things I was looking at, I should have started with this, and I apologize. In the appeal, in this letter, there's sort of the part that was appealed in italics, and then the response in regular font. And one of the points was assure the design of the building has eye appeal. And so as we consider the appeal, I think we have to consider how well each of those segments are dealt with.
Sure.
And so then the responding answer is it's a mix of colors, materials, gable overhangs, etc. The rear includes roof eyebrow gables and metal canopies. Those are all statements that it is in fact true that the building has those things. It's not entirely clear that that gives it eye appeal when the rear facing is facing a parking lot that's public. So my point to start this conversation was I don't know for sure whether I would say that the building does indeed have eye appeal simply because it has those things.
No, eye appeal is what the neighbors have created as a standard.
Okay.
Yes.
That's not a standard that we don't have any,
Right.
must meet eye appeal within our code, probably wouldn't be allowed. We do have some standards though about what the front should look, what we're looking for within that, that's sort of outlined in the planning commission memo. So I just want to be clear on that the eye appeal test isn't one of our city standards. That's their being the neighbor's sort of concern with the project.
You don't like those subjective ordinances?
Well, I was curious about that.
In the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, so we would have to find findings that disagree with the findings of the planning commission, or we can have a conversation and see where it goes.
Certainly. I think you summed it up best right there.
So
So go ahead.
after 16 years on planning, it kind of is in the blood, right? So when you look at the notes, they talked about those breaking up the roof line on the rear, right? And that's why those eyebrows are there. So I would like to continue on that discussion, knowing that while I don't have, my standards really are, this is what the front of the building should look like. We have how much glass you can have, how much stone you need to have, but realizing that this is something that is kind of a second front, and want to talk about what flexibility would you have at saying, would you be willing, or is it possible to do some articulation of the building, or to add some color to the backside, some, maybe vertical, what have you? Give me your ideas.
Councilmember, yeah. Ben Mines with Grandmore Homes. Initially, our intent was to actually articulate the building to give it some more features. However, based on the size of the property and the constraints that we had to work in, it's basically the maximum allowable space. So to make some jogs or something like that, I'm in agreement with you that the back of the building is fairly plain. We'd certainly be willing to look at some, different colors just to break up the units. We do some different textures of products on the rear as well, if that would help. It's a pretty simple thing to do.
Yeah,
Councilmember Demmer?
I really do appreciate that. I mean, you understand the position we're in,
Yes.
where we live in the community, and you have to kind of think to yourself, would I want to stare at this for 30 years? And,
Yes.
and I appreciate you're saying that you had some articulation in mind, but you're trying to get the biggest size you can, which I'm sure everyone who is going to live inside of it will certainly appreciate the larger size. I don't know how we approve it with a modified condition that you're agreeing to do some accoutrements, some color, some vertical. I don't know the right way to say it. In my mind, when I think of row houses, I kind of think of, the ones in San Francisco, where you get the one color and then the next color.
Sure.
It doesn't have to look like that, but you guys have designers and architects. If it's something you'd want to look at, it's probably better, right? So I guess I'd be open to any suggestions, if we're getting that sort of agreement that some color changes, some verticals would be acceptable. How do we go forward documenting that agreement if we should choose to deny the appeal and approve the planning commission?
With the modification that the developer or the builder makes some additional, I don't know what the word you use, but some additional architectural interest on the back part of the property.
I guess my concern is some improvements ends up being pretty.
Typically, we would leave it to, state that here's kind of what we want, and that whatever comes in must be approved by planning staff. And then we trust our planning staff that they would go, yep, that makes sense, that's good, or no, that doesn't.
And we've done this, I think, a few times in the past.
Yeah, I'm curious for the council, I'm sorry. Go ahead. On the front of the building, if the back had color changes, so unit 1 was a little different color than unit 2, should the front have similar color changes, or is that, I'm just, you know what I mean, like, I do worry that the front is all one big solid color. I think they have more things to break it up, and it's looking more into the neighbors. But I was just, whatever we write, if we're saying this is all they have to do and then we're happy with it, I wanted to make sure that we wrote enough to be happy with it.
Councilmember Wells.
I think the problem with doing this is you get into tastes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anything's uglier than 6 different colors. I don't mind the look of the front of this.
Okay.
And I guess my idea of breaking up the back would be another solid color. I have no idea how to design, but not changing every unit color-wise, but maybe taking another color and doing some accents or whatever, just to change the look. But I certainly wouldn't intend to have 6 different colors on the back.
Councilmember Johnson.
A couple of thoughts, and one of them I really would like the developer and builder's input as to whether it was part of their thinking on this. But with respect to the multiple colors, I tend to agree with Councilmember Wells on the multiple colors along the row. I mean, one of our neighboring cities has an apartment complex that has all these different design motifs all throughout it, and it's been there for 30, 40 years, and it's never quite pulled it off. Yeah. So, I don't want to see that either, but I will say the front of this building is attractive in my mind and does pay heed to most of those requirements. You've got the board and batten kind of dormer areas over the bedrooms. You've got the shake areas over the entryways. You've got the kind of transom window approach to things and all that sort of stuff. I candidly probably would have liked to have seen a little offset between the buildings and rolled that into some of the privacy kind of fencing in the back. But here's the question that I would love your input on. Did you ever think about or talk about turning this around so that this was the side facing the school, and so that the backyard was the side then facing into the neighborhood, so that the backyards weren't kind of out there in kind of open view of the school and the school parking lot? Did you have that conversation? Is there flexibility enough on the lot to do it? Because that then puts this front kind of elevation in the most publicly viewable kind of part of the property.
I'll address you, Mr. Councilmember. Certainly, I guess our initial thought was to face it towards the neighbors so that they had the neighbors that are appealing our plan here. We tried to pull the building as far away from the neighbors as possible, just to give more of a buffer. I mean, it's a really, really tight piece of property. Yep. And our thoughts were more, obviously there's a lot more traffic in public seeing the backside of it. So, we're thinking more as the bushes and stuff start growing up. I mean, yeah, are you going to see that in the wintertime? Absolutely. But with the screening without some of the landscaping, stuff like that, really from the parking lot, you'd be looking more towards the top of the building, the second floor. So is it a possibility to spin it around? Absolutely. We could certainly go back and look at that. Just to kind of address, the appeal from the neighbors, which I've spoken with most of them after the planning meeting, you know, they, you know, I think we're talking about something completely different from what their appeal is, because they're not going to see the backside of it, and so, you know, what you guys are talking, and I'm totally in agreement with it, we can do something to dress up the back,
Okay.
and would be willing to do that.
So would your thoughts in dressing up the back and, for example, the dormer areas have a corresponding color change, maybe
Yeah.
in the dormers there, to add a little bit of extra color to the back and the like, so there'd be, if there were a blue board and batten kind
Yeah.
of dormer on the front, we'd have something similar to that on the back?
Yeah, yes, sir, and, you know, maybe another thing we could do is, you know, break it up between stories, we could, you know, put a trim band across it to separate the stories, we could do a different color feature on the lower level, you know, different type of material or color on the upper level, just to kind of break it up. I'm in agreement with you, I think no offense, but I think trying to do 6 different colors is gonna, even if they're in the same color palette, it's gonna look a little goofy, you know, I mean, what you're trying to do with that is to give it that offset of
Depth.
depth,
Yeah.
you know, but it depending on how you do it, I don't know if that's the right approach.
I would just share with the council, as much as I appreciate the developer's willingness to address some of the design and kind of elevation aspects of this, I do intend to support it. Support the development and to support the planning commission's approval, but I would like us to consider a modification, and so I kind of look back to the council as to what would we like to articulate there if other council members are in agreement with it. And I do want to say, as much as I've been critical of this process, I do come from that kind of approach. Look, you've got a piece of property, you want to develop it, it meets the criteria, you should have the freedom to build what you want there within reason, as long as it's meeting some of the city code and is not in violation of that. So that's kind of my view on things.
So I've got a question. I'm just curious, because we're talking about the back facing the school. And one of my concerns is we're looking right at the back of all of the living space. And when you drive down Northdale and you drive by those townhomes up there where the backs come right out to Northdale, you're looking at their lawn chairs and their toys they've got sitting out on their patio, and you've got.
Right into their living room
Yeah,
at night.
yeah. And I'm just, have you ever considered, would it work to put just a nice privacy fence on that school side? So at least from the school side, it would be a clean line, and then, you know, because anything they've got or with their privacy is all gonna be below that fence line then. Is that
It'd
something?
be absolutely something we could consider. Like I said, Mr. Mayor, I think our intent was more to do the screening with landscaping as opposed to a solid wood fence. And we try to take a little bit softer approach rather than having, you know,
Okay.
I could, you know, my grandpa had a farm and, you know, putting fences up was kind of a no-no except to keep the cattle in, so.
And Mr. Mayor, the association, should they choose to say, no, we want a fence, they could always come in for a fence permit and put up a fence, right? Later.
Yeah,
You
no,
know.
I was just talking about the
Yeah.
aesthetics, looking at it though, from the school, you know, and I just think about when I drive by that place on Northdale, I think, boy, it'd sure be nice if they didn't have all that, you know, all their stuff sitting out on their patio. Recognizing it's their patio, I've got stuff on my patio, you know, but it's just, you're in a goldfish bowl then. Councilmember Kicker?
Make a comment, you know, the building elevation, the rear building elevation, it does not show the landscaping, but there's gonna be bushes all back here. And when you look at the current property today, it has bushes all along that back line. And looking through those bushes, it's almost difficult to see the school, you know, when you look at it on Google Maps. And so, you know, so this is a little misleading, because it's actually fairly close to the back lot line. And if you have bushes in there, if you put the bushes in here, it's, you know, I think it would soften that, you know, so that you're not necessarily going to be looking
If they
right
were
in.
like an evergreen or arborvitae kind of variety or something like that, then it would be, you know, it would be all year round. So,
Right.
but, you know, this is where councils are terrible
Yeah.
at doing this stuff. I mean,
Right.
it's like, we have to leave landowners with the freedom to do what's right on their lot. And, we can express a concern about the public aspects of this and how it's gonna look. And I hear that we've got a landowner and a developer that are listening to us. And so candidly, that's probably gonna be enough for me in this one.
Councilmember Demmer?
I do generally agree. I think that they're probably, we should trust the planning commission on designs. I trust the landowner, get them to make what they want. I think the challenge is we do have to consider all the people who don't own the land that have a stake in how the neighborhood looks. And so I don't think it's unreasonable to ask, and clearly the developer doesn't think it's unreasonable to ask for a little update to that back end, given the visibility and again, we disagree on what would look better. So certainly I don't want to dictate what the right thing is, some vertical breakup so it doesn't look like one really long building, whatever you think it is. If you decide to put in a fence, then you have the problem that you can only see the top half, and so then anything you do on the bottom doesn't help with the aesthetic. So I would support it. I like the idea of a modification that you'll work with the planning commission to planning staff to increase the architectural aesthetic from the school side. As far as the appeal itself, I do understand a neighborhood being concerned with a new large development coming in. 6 townhomes change the character of a neighborhood, but this neighborhood does have much larger multi-unit areas in it. I think that having a nice looking townhome isn't a big detriment to a neighborhood. I would be comfortable with something like this moving in near me, which is kind of my standard for whether I push hard on an appeal or not, is I would be okay with one in my neighborhood. And I think that the discussion around the appeal and which rules were met and what this does is if there's a place where all the rules are met and there's still some discomfort with it, then there's not much we can do on this specific project other than go back and look at our rules and see if our rules are equipped to handle what people want in their city. And so this is not to say we don't listen to the people doing the appeal. The appeal might not be something we legally can do much about based on the findings, other than asking for the developer to work with the aesthetic. However, if there are elements of this that we think, boy, that's something we should revisit the code on, that's what it really spurs on, is saying what rules are we going to place on a developer in the future for their own land to make sure it's still in the good of the area. So that's where I'm sitting. I do hear and understand the appeal. The specific findings in the appeal, I think, are pretty tough to say we can force someone to make changes around, especially if someone seems willing to upgrade the aesthetics. I don't think we can ask for major changes to the site plan. I actually think, as much as it would have made sense just with your plot in mind to have the nicest front face facing out where everyone can see it and the people at the school can look and say, I'd like to have that building, I actually think it was very considerate of you to have the nicest part facing the neighbors who have to look at it every day, and backing the building up as far away from the neighbors as you can was, that's a considerate way to approach it. So it's one of those situations where, look, this sort of building does make sense for that plot, and it seems like it's going to be a compromise that maybe not everyone's going to be thrilled with, but I think you're well within your rights to build it this way. So I don't know how to move for that modification. I want to make sure everyone else gets their words in, but I think we're in pretty close agreement on what we're asking for.
You want to take a motion?
I will try. You might have to poke me until I say the words right.
Can you work accoutrement in there?
Accoutrements?
somewhere?
Yeah, accoutrements, all right. We'll go with architectural enhancements.
Okay, all right.
Okay with that. All right.
Councilmember Griscoviac?
May I just add something before you make your motion, because you might have something in there that I might want to add. First of all, I do appreciate the developer's willingness to work on the design standards, because if you look at this, he's well within the code. He's not asking for a variance or anything on this property. When you look at this property, there are other multifamily units in the area. One thing that I noticed with the other multifamily units in this area, and it has to do with the appellant's response here, and you figure those appellants, you know, that their houses have been there since the 1950s and 60s, so one thing that I noticed, and it's in here, is the windows on the north side of this building. The appellant asked for those to be no windows on that north side, and I would think that maybe if you remove the windows from the second level on the north side, because it's kind of a higher building and you're looking in, I noticed that there are no windows on any of the other multifamily units in that area. So if the developer would maybe take that into consideration, I think that would appease the appellant a little bit as well. The only other thing, and it goes back to the parking issue, the driveway, the narrow driveway, and I think I might just ask staff or maybe even the fire chief or someone else, is it safe to have a garbage truck drive in that narrow driveway to pick up the garbage cans at the edge of their garages and then back all the way out to 109th? Because that, to me, doesn't sound very good. I mean, other than the safety issue of a truck backing up, but you have the beep, 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 you know, all the way back there. So,
Well, and then backing out onto the street.
yeah, that to me seems a bit of a safety issue. So those are my comments. I would like to see if you'd be willing to think about those windows and what staff would think about the garbage truck backing through there.
And Councilmember Griscoviac, there's a lot of townhomes where, because of how the homes face each other, they require that they've only got those, what do you call those higher windows?
Awning style.
Awning style
Transom.
windows, transom windows, you know, so that you're not actually looking out them, but you still get the natural light in them. So that, I mean, that, if that's reasonable, I don't know. But
That's right. I would-
Councilmember Geisler?
So, my recollection of things like this in the past, what a garbage truck would typically do is they would back in and collect the garbage and pull out. So they're not backing out onto 109th. They would be backing into this development, collecting the garbage and leaving.
So they have to put the garbage cans out on the other side of the drive then? Because if they're,
They,
the way.
they may have to get out and manually do those cans, you know. It's whatever agreement that they make. But the truck drivers on those garbage trucks are gonna do what is the safest and the best for them, right? As for the windows on the side units, that's an amenity for those units. You can put a two-story house there, and if you wanna try and tell me I can't have any windows on the second story of my house, that's not gonna fly. You know, just because this is a townhouse, it could be, you know, you could put a two-story house next door to any other single-family house in the neighborhood. And I think it's unreasonable of us to try and put that kind of a restriction on a development just because the house next door happens to be a one-level house.
Yeah, and the only thing I would dovetail on that is the ones on the upper story are bedrooms and bathroom.
Yeah.
And then there's only really one window at the kind of, I want to say it's a dining room, kitchen area kind of component on the main level. There aren't any on the living room level.
Right.
Or the living room part of the floor plan for that end unit. So from the perspective of the people to the north, when they look at this end of the building, they're really only looking at one unit, which would be no different than if they were looking at a single-family home, but it just happens to be really long.
Yeah.
And has 5 other homes after it. So,
and it's 54 feet from or 53 and a half feet from the back wall of the building to the lot line.
right.
So even though if you were building a single-family home in this, you would be a lot further away from that back lot line, 54 feet isn't unnecessarily close to a property line if you were building a single-family home. So I guess I don't have an issue with it. I think it's gonna be, you know, I understand the neighbor's concern. It's a change. This big thing is just gonna drop in there. But I think it's like so many things, within a few months, it's gonna kind of disappear. You're just not really gonna pay any attention to it anymore. Took me a little bit longer for those River North apartments, but, okay. So you were gonna make a run at
I'm
that.
gonna try. In planning case 18-21, move that the council affirm the planning commission's approval of the site plan for the 6-unit townhome with modifications for architectural enhancements at the rear of the property to be worked out between the developer and the planning staff, including all of the conditions noted in the December 20th staff report. Sorry, in addition to all of the conditions noted in the December 20th staff report.
Motion by Demmer, second by Geisler.
Just a quick question, by the rear of the property, you mean the rear elevation to the building, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And that motion carries.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. We're on to item 15, consider resolution number 18-10 sub 8, accepting plans and specifications for Lions Coon Creek Park improvements and authorizing solicitation of bids. Mr. Himmer, anything you want to hit on here? Got some,
No, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we're just ready and eager to get moving forward on this final park project. We're looking forward to bringing that back to you, having the whole package. We discussed it briefly in work session here a couple of weeks ago with the other components that go with this site plan, the playgrounds, the building enhancements, lighting and such. So all that will come back to you in March as a consolidated package, and we'll see where we end up.
Mr. Himmer, we've looked at the kind of the proposed images of the playground and things. They've been in our packages. Is that online? Like, is that on like the, on our parks for the Lions Coon Creek or anything?
Mr.
I'm just
Mayor?
curious where residents can go and just look and see what to expect.
That was just, it came in earlier today, actually, because we softened some of the colors. Some of the colors were kind of bright and would fade fairly easily. So we just kind of got a new rendering of that. All the components are there, just slightly different coloring scheme that Stephanie Ring has. It was part of the spring newsletter that will be going out. So I don't know if we want to share it before we share it, but we certainly have it and it will be available. And if anyone's interested, they can certainly contact me as well, and maybe we just put it out and scoop ourselves maybe.
Did Mr. Gunderson take those new colors past his high-paid consultants at the school? Councilmember Demmer?
So I do want to just let people at home know this has been one that's gone through a lot of meetings, and part of it's because we know that Lions Park is something that the community really puts a lot of value in, and we all heard loud and clear the message on the first day is, if you're going to touch it, don't screw it up. That's been the team motto here. We did some things where we were able to find ways to get trails that were as effective as planned, but cheaper, so that we could use the money to increase what we did at Lions Park. That was a trade-off that we thought made sense. So for example, we routed things to just slightly different in a way that then the construction costs of the trail were cheaper. So if you disagree with those things, please let us know. But the thought was to make sure that Lions Park remains sort of the jewel of the park system as far as playgrounds go. So where we got to, seems like it's going to be pretty great. So kudos to everyone who worked on it. And again, it's never easy to go in with that much pressure. So remember, everyone worked on it for quite a long time. So I would like to move to adopt resolution number 18-10 sub 8, approving plans and specifications and ordering advertisements for bids for the Lions Coon Creek Park renovation project. And also just thank the park board and the Lions for all their involvement.
Motion by Demmer, second by Johnson. Discussion? I think you must have summed it up well.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. All right, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, and that motion carries. Item 16 is to consider planning case 18-22, consider resolution 19-28, approving the land use amendment 11790 Exeon Street SPL Holdings. And so, Mr. Harlicker, what's summation, what are we doing here now?
Yeah, Mayor and council members, this is the corresponding land use application to the zoning change you approved earlier at this meeting, changing the land use designation from high-density residential to moderate-density residential to allow for the townhouse development.
Very good. Council?
Mayor,
Councilmember Kicker?
I make a motion that the council approve the attached resolution 19-28 approving the proposed land use amendment based on the following findings. And those findings are listed there. 2 of them.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Kicker, second by Demmer. Discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? And that motion carries. Item
And
7.
notice he was able to say that without saying Exion or Xeon.
Very smooth. I was gonna say it both ways.
I've heard it both ways. Item 17 is to consider adopting the updated City of Coon Rapids Comprehensive Surface Water Management Plan. Mr. Hammer.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is the end of a very long road on one of our statutory required plans. It's a standalone stormwater surface water management plan. It was included by reference in the city's 2040 comprehensive plan. We talked about it a few times along the way, really some of the goals, the implementation. It lays forth kind of the next 10 years worth of some capital programming, some education, some monitoring. While the plan itself lays that roadmap, you're not authorizing any funding necessarily as part of that. That comes back as part of individual projects with our annual budgets and other things. So mainly looking at some water quantity, water quality, some of that surface water, groundwater connections. Most of what you've probably heard recently is kind of the rear yard nuisance flooding and some of the things that come up. You know, it includes goose management, it includes pond treatments. There are a lot of items identified within there. It has a very regimented 10-year implementation program, of which we're a year behind because this was a 2018 project we're now getting to completing in 2019. So again, those come back to you on individual bases. We'll see you next week to talk about an iron enhanced sand filtration project in coordination with the watershed. So it's a roadmap for us that we'll be revisiting often over the next 10 years. And I'll answer any questions any of you may have.
All right. Council, any questions from Mr. Hammer?
Just a comment, good work. It was a
Councilmember
lot of
Johnson.
work. It was a lot of work.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Geisler?
I will make a motion that we adopt the comprehensive surface water management plan as attached in our packet and authorize its implementation.
Second.
Motion by Geisler, second by Wells. Discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Geisler?
So if people want to see this plan, it will be available on our website?
Yes.
So just if you want to read a lot of great things on surface water management, go on over to the website.
Mayor, I'll add to that.
Councilmember Griscoviac?
Comprehensive is the key word here. 58-page plan that you can find and check it out. Yeah, good work. Nice work.
And I would suggest that if this is something you really enjoy reading, they should consider applying for our Coon Creek watershed. We've board. Yeah. So, all right. So we have a motion and a second on this. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? And that motion carries. And we are on to item 18. This is just an introduction. Consider introduction of an ordinance establishing a moratorium on self-storage facilities. Mr. Fernelius, you want to highlight it?
Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to. Since we don't do this very often, it would probably be helpful to kind of explain a little bit about how we got to this point. So as council is aware, we have had a couple of land use applications related to self-storage facilities in the last few months. One of those was approved, one of those was denied by the planning commission, and then ultimately the council affirmed that decision or the appeal that was made by the applicant. But during that process, there were a number of questions that were raised about self-storage facilities. How many of them do we have? Where are these allowed? Where are the potential locations that one of these facilities might be located in the future? What kind of demand is there for additional facilities down the road? How are these currently regulated? Do we want to look at making amendments or changes to our code? All good questions that frankly I think are going to take some time for us to evaluate, have discussion both with the council. Obviously the planning commission will be involved in that as well. Really the only way to, I think, do that and kind of preserve our ability to sort of protect the future, if you will, at least on the short-term basis, is to consider development moratorium, which essentially puts a hold on any applications for a period of time. In this case, the draft ordinance, or the ordinance, the way that it's presented, would be for a period of 6 months. So during that time frame, we would not accept any development applications. There is an exemption for existing facilities. If they want to make repairs to their property, they can certainly do that. But this would be for any expansion or new projects after the effective date. So if this is introduced tonight, and then it would come back on, I believe, February 19th, it would become, and the council were to approve it that night, then it would become effective 15 days later or on March 9th. So basically between now and March 9th, if there are any applications that come in, as we have discussed, there are at least a couple of proposals out there. One party in particular I did talk to yesterday. They are aware of this deadline, as is the land seller. It's not clear if they're going to get their application in time. They did have a question about if it were received before the 9th, would it be processed? And if it were a complete application, we would have to process it. So we would be subject to the 60-day rule, and we'd have to act on it within that time frame. So if we get it in before then, or we receive it before then, we would have to process it. If it's not complete, or if it's not received by that time frame, it would then be subject to the moratorium. We don't think that we're going to need more than 6 months, but it obviously, until we get into the discussion, we don't know how much time it would take. If the council wanted to extend it, I believe they can extend it an additional 12 months or 18 months in total. But that would have to be by separate action. This ordinance just would, if it were ultimately approved, would be for a 6-month time frame. So we think this will give us an opportunity to study the issue, answer some of those questions that you have raised previously. And then at the end of that process, if there are code changes, we would obviously have to try and put those in place before that moratorium would end, so that the new regulations, if there are any, would be in place following the moratorium. So again, this is just an introduction of the ordinance. It would come back on February 19th for your consideration to be adopted.
Thank you. Mr. Brody, so if we get near the end of the 6 months and we decide we need another 6 months or more time, is it an immediate action? I mean, if we take an action at the council meeting to extend it, is there a delay, or does that extend it?
I'll be honest, I'd have to check that. I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Fair enough.
So
sometime in that 6-month window, get back to us.
I will.
As the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals once said to me, that's a level of candor we're not accustomed to hearing.
Yes, that question. We're so focused on getting this thing in place.
Council, do you have any other questions on this before we,
Mayor,
Councilmember
I have
Griscoviac?
a question. In which land use zones are storage facilities permitted uses? Is it commercial, industrial? Those are permitted uses?
Councilmember Griscoviac, currently under our code, in the general commercial district, it's a conditional use for self-storage facilities. In our industrial district, it's a permitted use. And as we previously discussed about one of the two applications, which is in the River Rapids Overlay District, there are additional standards on top of that.
So then this ordinance would put a pause on regardless of.
That's
zone.
correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
All right.
Any other questions? Hearing no further questions, then we will consider the ordinance establishing a moratorium on self-storage facilities introduced. And we'll be looking at it at our February 19th meeting. Last item on our agenda, before we get to open mic, is to consider Resolution 19-31, Real Estate Equities Housing Revenue Bonds. Mr. Brown, anything you want to cover on that?
Yes, saying Your Honor and members of the council, obviously you have seen some previous approvals related to this project as recently as your last meeting in January. There will be several more coming before you early this year. This particular action is for a preliminary bond resolution. As you might remember, this project will be financed with a combination of conduit revenue bonds, tax increment financing, and tax credits, which are issued through Minnesota Housing. Tonight, the council is asked to consider a resolution preliminarily approving the use of conduit bond financing for this project that will enable the developer to make its application to MHFA for tax credits. And just a quick status update on this project, and again, it's a 10480 unit workforce housing project near the intersection on 94th and Springbrook Drive. The developer has indicated they're on track to submit planning applications in the coming weeks. Because it's in a port district, that site plan will come before you as well, so you can look for that towards spring.
All right. Councilmember Demmer?
And just a reminder on conduit revenue bonds, those are the ones that we're a party that signs to, but we don't carry any obligation.
That's correct. There's really no risk or obligation on the city's part.
Okay, then if nobody else has, I will move to adopt Resolution 19-31, providing for a public hearing regarding multifamily housing development and granting preliminary approval to the issuance of conduit revenue bonds for the Port Evergreen apartment project.
Second. Motion by Demmer, second by Kicker. Discussion?
Your Honor?
Councilmember Griscoviac?
Just for clarification, the city has facilitated this type of bond issuance on many occasions for a lot of different development projects in the cities over the years, right? This is nothing really out of the ordinary in development. Okay.
So, Mr. Brown, there's a certain dollar amount that we can't exceed though, correct? I mean, this is $30 million, and that's not going to limit us on any upcoming projects that you can see in the pipeline or anything?
That's correct. We don't believe this would negatively affect our ability to do other public projects by issuing bonds.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Aye, opposed, and that motion carries. And we are on to open mic. Anybody here to address council for open mic? All right. Open mic provides an opportunity for the public to address the city council on subjects that are not part of the regular meeting agenda. The public is invited to express any concerns they may have which are relevant to the affairs, policies, or practices of the city of Coon Rapids. Remarks will be limited to 3 minutes. And if you could just come up to the podium, state your name and address before addressing the council, and you're all good to go.
My name is Brandon Basil. I live at 12795 Swallow Street, Northwest in Coon Rapids. Reason why I'm here today is about about the parking ordinance of parking across from a private drive. I don't think it's a very widely known ordinance throughout the city, and it severely impacts my ability to park near my house. The driveways in our neighborhood are kind of staggered, and then you throw in some mailboxes and a fire hydrant, and how wide my neighbor's driveway is across, that I have to park 3 or 4 houses down then. I've been living here for almost 4 years, and whenever I'd come home from work, I'd park in front of my house. I work night shift, because we have 4 cars in our household, and so I just park there so people can get in and out. We don't have to move around. And became aware of it because a visitor at our house got the violation notice, so that brought me aware to that situation. And so I'm wondering if there's anything that can be done. I feel that an ordinance like that isn't really needed nowadays with cars having backup cameras, and if there could be something else that could be done if somebody does back into somebody, like cite them for improper backing. So, thank you.
It's an interesting dilemma, because that's the street you showed.
The one I brought to your attention, right?
Yeah. Yeah, all the driveways are across from each other, and it's like, so where can you park on that street?
Has no opportunity to park in front of his own property.
Yeah,
I think that's most streets, isn't it?
yeah, well, it's a lot of them, and I think a lot of them, you'll see, and that's why they do the extra little pads, as we get up multiple drivers, all of a sudden you're going, oh boy, we gotta put some little cut acrosses in there.
And I'm just remembering, we had, not just for context purposes, not too long ago, probably about 2 years ago, when we did a street improvement on about 105th, we actually had a homeowner come in and express concern about people that were actually now, because of the road improvement, parking across the street from his driveway when nobody had ever parked there before. And he was worried that he was going to hit a vehicle just by forgetting that sometimes people are now parking there in violation of the ordinance because there's nowhere else to park on that street anymore, essentially. So it's one of those ordinances that kind of cuts in different directions, but it certainly does limit the places you can park.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm Jane Colpine. I live at 12792 Swallow Street, directly across the street from Brandon. And we built our home there 32 years ago, and we've never had a problem. I think we've always just considered that the street was everyone's property.
Sorry.
And
Your 3 minutes are up.
and
Yeah, I am so sorry.
No. And we don't, we just don't have a problem with Brandon parking, or anyone parking in front of our house. And we've talked to other neighbors too that are supportive of this, and just wondering why you would get a citation, or does it come from a complaint of somebody complaining, or what?
One of the things we can do in this process is take a look at the origin of the ordinance, if we can find out any information on that and context that the city attorney's office or the police department might have about that.
Yeah. This council has never really had a conversation about that ordinance, because it was here long before we became the council.
Okay.
And it might be a good idea for us to have a conversation about it. Councilmember Demmer?
My guess is, and this is just a guess, but it would have something to do with if someone's trying to back up a trailer or something, they'd have no easy way to do that. But I think that really what we should do is look at it more comprehensively, because there's the combination of you can't park off improved surfaces, and you can't have too many improved surfaces, and you can't park across the street from a driveway, right? So in the end, if we look at parking holistically, there might be ways to keep the don't park there, but you can still, because people get trapped where they can't further improve their yard, they can't park off surface, and they can't park near their house because of driveways, and that doesn't make, doesn't make for an easy situation.
We have a fire hydrant, and then all these mailboxes. I don't know if anyone should be parked on our street. If that were the case.
Yeah. And part of it too is some roads are narrower than others. And so while it might have made a lot of sense on a narrower street, because, people could really get trapped in their driveway if people were parked on both sides of it, especially if they had a larger vehicle. On a wider street, maybe there'd be more exception room. So I think it makes sense to look at it as how many places do we think there are in the city where there's just going to be not much opportunity to park because of all the different parking rules.
And it's just never been a problem in 32 years, so it just seems strange that it's coming up now, so appreciate your consideration.
Okay. Thank you. And you got their name and addresses? Yes. Okay, perfect. So, yeah, so you'll get something back from staff, and then we'll figure out if we're going to take a look at that. And we appreciate you both coming in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Yes, it was so fun to have somebody here for open mic.
Good question.
Yeah, well, that was a great question.
Safety committee is gonna have some fun.
All right, so no one else here for open mic. We don't have any reports on previous open mics, and we are at other business.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Geisler?
I will call on Mr. Himmer, do you want to give us your snowplow plan? Because my hunch is that people might be interested in that. We're out plowing tonight, tomorrow,
Councilmember Geisler, members of the council, we actually updated communications earlier today. I was gonna take a look at things, because coming over from Public Works, it appears we probably already have our 3 inches. So that may be adjusted here to a full plow as I'm leaving tonight. But certainly we had crews already planned to start at 4 and work our regular 12-hour shift probably, and then maybe take a day off before we do it all over again in a couple more days. But that information was passed on to Stephanie Ring earlier. It's probably out on Facebook or Twitter or something else as we speak. But as I said, I'll be speaking with Josh as I leave here and updating him on the existing conditions.
It was posted, but it said tomorrow morning. So tomorrow morning, when you read that, you kind of think, oh, like 8 or 10 or something, but 4, well, that's different. 4, that's kind of the middle of the night yet.
We like to get out on the roads before the rush hour hits, and then we give it a break while people are commuting, and then we go back in after that and hit them again before the evening commute, and then go home and sleep and do it all over again the next day.
So for those people watching live who have been driven to watch the Coon Rapids City Council because they're not watching the State of the Union address, if you have a chance to go out and move your vehicle, if it's out in the street, now would be a good time to do it.
It would be a great time. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Demmer?
And just a kudos to the plow crew, because the other day when it was that sleeting, icing awful, the roads were almost good enough that I fell down when I got to a parking lot because I didn't realize how slippery it was in the parking lot. So that could have been really dangerous, and it seemed like most of the roads were pretty good shape, and it was as soon as you got off of a surface that was salted and onto something like a parking lot, you realized just how bad it could have been.
Thank you.
It was quite an anomaly, too. There was school on Monday, but no garbage trucks.
Right.
I've never seen that happen before. Mr. Stemwell, you had your hand up there? Over here.
Mayor Council just mentioned that coming up on this Sunday, February 10th, is the Family Fun Day at the Coon Rapids Ice Center.
Oh, yeah.
Part of the larger celebration for Snowflake Days. And so our staff will be out there doing different activities from 3:30 to 7:30, including on the outdoor rink and the indoor rink, free public skating, ice bowling, dice games, limbo, you name it, they'll be doing that out there on the 10th.
I just have to mention something. It was pointed out to me on social media. There's a show out in Milwaukee, Wisconsin called The Morning Blend, and there was a feature on there with a gal from the Raptor Center out there, and it was really fascinating because the gal in the show, Tiffany Ogle, is a former Miss Coon Rapids, and the person from the Raptor Center is a Coon Rapids alum, Maddie Williams, and it was just awesome. They were talking about the Falcon and stuff, and I thought, well, that's pretty cool out on a television show out in Wisconsin to have such a Coon Rapids presence there. So it was fun. All right, any other business to come before council?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Demmer, second by Geisler to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Aye, we're adjourned.